I do not think it's inevitable at this point, certainly, that Donald Trump will replace JD Vance, but I don't think the chances are zero either, because since JD Vance was announced as Trump's VP, he has not been polling very well.
A number of new polls have come out recently showing JD Vance with record low approval across the United States, being the least liked vice presidential nominee in decades, according to the data that we have on hand.
So that's the first reason people are actually floating the idea now of potentially replacing JD Vance is straight up, he's just not polling very well. But the second reason, which I haven't heard anyone bring up, is the other side just replaced the president. So if you're going to replace the top of the ticket, yes, it changes the dynamics of the race. So Trump picks his VP pick, JD Vance, and then right after that, you replace the presidential pick, you slide Kamala up there. I think Donald Trump has a real case to say, look, you fundamentally changed the race. Now I'm going to reevaluate. I think if Donald Trump actually did replace JD Vance, say in a month, if Donald Trump's polling is either lower than Kamala or too close for comfort, I don't think he's going to pay that much of a political price, because I do think that it's fundamentally unfair to Donald Trump if you just change the race a couple weeks after he chooses his vice president.
Why Trump suddenly thinks picking JD Vance was a mistake, Joe Biden's decision to drop out and endorse Harris to succeed him on the Democratic ticket has Trump's team scrambling. Much of Donald Trump's presidential campaign, including picking JD Vance, was structured around attacking Biden. But then Biden announces he's withdrawing. Trump campaign officials acknowledge Trump selected the inexperienced Vance to boost his own base, not to extend a hand to swing voters, according to The Atlantic. Now, of course, there are real new questions. JD Vance's youth, which maybe seemed like an advantage in contrast to Joe Biden at the top of the ticket, compared to Kamala Harris and the likely running mates that she's considering, it all of a sudden doesn't really seem particularly advantageous.
And this is David Pakman, someone that I've seen online as being pretty anti-Trump, but I would generally agree with that assessment that maybe now JD Vance is not the strongest pick. I mean, maybe he is. I actually think, in a sense, it's an advantage to Trump now to just sit around and wait to see what Kamala Harris does in terms of a VP pick, maybe even wait to the end of their convention, and then reevaluate where the poll's at. How's JD Vance's approval rating? How am I doing as Trump versus Kamala Harris in the polls? And if things are going badly, I think you almost get a get out of jail free card to just say, hey, JD Vance is still great, and I still like him, but I'm actually going to put in Vivek Ramaswamy or Doug Burgum or just someone that he thinks is going to poll a little bit better than JD Vance. And honestly, I think that would be fine in terms of the electorate. I think people would understand if Trump or JD Vance or whatever gave a speech saying, hey, this is just what we need to do right now to try to beat Kamala Harris and the Democrats. They replaced the top of the ticket. I don't think he'd pay that much of a price politically. And from what I've seen in terms of the legality and if you're allowed to do that, it seems like it's not impossible to replace the vice president at this stage in the race.
I don't think for a second that Trump and the people around him think it's viable or plausible to replace JD Vance at this point. It seems once again like the risk to keeping Vance is lower than the risk to replacing Vance.
And so to my point about Trump having a get out of jail free card, I think the only risk there is in replacing JD Vance is that in 3 weeks or a month from now, when Trump reevaluates the race, if JD Vance is polling very well and is very likable in the Republican Party, then yes, there would be a risk of replacing JD Vance and kind of disappointing some of the base. But then if that's true, he's not going to want to probably replace Vance. However, in 3 weeks to a month, if the polling for JD Vance is looking a little bit sluggish and it looks like potentially some of his comments about the childless cat ladies
by a bunch of childless cat ladies
are turning away some swing voters, I think Trump's base will just be like, replace him, whatever, do what you need to do to win. I think that in that instance, if JD Vance is actually still polling poorly in 3 weeks to a month, I think there's a way bigger risk of keeping JD Vance. And again, because the other side replaced the top of the ticket, I think politically Donald Trump can just say, well, you replaced the president, so I'm going to take another run at my vice president here, and all the best to JD Vance. He'll still be whatever, he can work in the cabinet, or he can still be like an advisor or whatever, work with him in the Senate. But I'm going to try Doug Burgum or Vivek or someone who's polling better or whatever. And then final thing, I don't want this to be an anti-JD Vance video. From what I've seen of JD Vance, he's great. He's got a great story. He's a very successful and accomplished person. But looking at this politically in terms of the next election based on where his poll numbers are at, I think it's at least an interesting question of will Donald Trump choose another VP? So we'll see what happens moving forward. But either way, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.